Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. On today's program, we travel to Antlers, Oklahoma to visit with Ian Thompson, the Tribal Preservation Officer for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, to look at the fat of the earth, or clay as it's also known, to see how generations of Native people have utilized this component of soil to create functional art. Ian and host Casey Hentges go through the process of creating a pot all the way from working the raw clay to traditional firing, and then use the finished pots to cook a traditional Choctaw meal. And then in Atoka, Oklahoma, Tommie James, an FCS extension educator for Bryan County, prepares a Choctaw Hunters Stew. Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance is provided by TLC, Oklahoma's leading garden center, Southwood Landscape and Garden Center, Tulsa's source for great gardens, southwoodgardencenter.com. and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing.
So we have a few pots here that have been drying for a couple of weeks. Can you kind of tell us what we're looking at?
Sure, these are just sort of Choctaw utilitarian pots, but they give us the range of 4,000 years of Choctaw development in the pottery sphere. This type was made 4,000 years ago. This is one my wife made. We're going to fire it here in a little bit, but you can see the dark colored areas in it. That's actually Spanish moss that's mixed with the clay. In the Choctaw language, Spanish moss is called Xomotacali. And when you mix it with the clay, it helps to hold the clay together while the pot's drying. But then when you fire it, the moss burns out, so it leaves all these little bitty holes in the clay matrix.
That seems like it would make for a weak pot.
It seems like it, but if you think about it, when a crack starts to form in the clay, it will start out very small, microscopically. And that tiny little crack can't jump across dead airspace left by the voids from the moss burning out. So it actually makes the pot more resistant to cracking. These other pieces show different time periods.
When would this pot have been used?
4,000 years ago.
Okay.
This is just a simple cooking bowl here. Mm-hmm. In Choctaw, it's called ampo. Beautiful. In the Choctaw language. This one represents quite a bit of technological development over the last one that I showed you. You can see the white specks in here. Those are pieces of burned mussel shell, calcium carbonate. Those are added to the clay to keep it from cracking. Unlike the temper with the Spanish moss, they don't burn out though. They make these flat little flakes that continue to help keep the pot from cracking even after it's fired.
And will you see that color pattern that's apparent now after it's fired?
It won't show up as much, but it'll still be there a little bit. Mostly what you'll see are the fire clouds, the oxidation and the reduction from the fire.
Okay, so next we have one it's a little bit newer.
That's right, this one would be about 500 years ago, thereabouts, about the time of first contact with Europe. This is just a small eating bowl. Again, it's called ampo in the Choctaw language. And it's got a design on it that probably originally represented a snake back at the time period, a mythological snake. Now this is just a simple eating bowl. Some of them were really ornate, some of them were polished, they were just beautiful, and they had very fancy designs carved in with special tools. But this one's just put in there with a stick. It's nice and simple.
So that would be a pot we would eat out of. How do we cook?
Well, this one here you can cook in because of the large pieces of mussel shell. But then this one's another style of Choctaw cooking pot. This is called a jar in English, or in Choctaw it's called Schulte. And this is also made from the clay tempered with the coarse mussel shell, like the last one I was showing you. This is a style that would have been made about 300 years ago. It holds the heat in, so this is kind of like a crock pot. This would be good for boiling beans or something like that takes a long time, but you don't have to constantly stir it.
Okay, and would they just set these right on the coals?
That's right, just like cast iron.
Excellent, wow.
Howdy-to, my name is Tommie James, and I work for the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service in Bryan County. I'm a family and consumer science extension educator, and I am a proud tribal member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma.
My name is Bernice Williams. I'm a registered nurse. I'm a diabetes educator. I work at the Hugo Clinic and the Toka Clinic. We see patients with diabetes to help them in their management of their diabetes.
Today we will be demonstrating a hearty and healthy stew called Choctaw Hunters Stew. We will be using fresh venison, deer meat, and we will be using fresh vegetables such as good old corn on the cob, potatoes, tomatoes, garlic, onions, celery, and okra. To prepare the Hunter's Stew, first you need to cut up your meat, and we've already cut up our meat, okay? And then we're going to come on over here to the stove, and we are going to add about 2 tablespoons of vegetable oil to a large stock pot. And we are going to saute 2 cloves of chopped fresh garlic and 2 large onions. We're going to saute our onions and garlic for about 5 minutes. Now we're going to add our deer meat to our sauteed onions and garlic. I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of pepper and a half a teaspoon of salt to our meat mixture. Mix it up really well. And then we're going to just let the deer meat brown in the pan for about another 5 minutes. When the deer meat browns, then you'll need to add water, and we're just going to be adding enough water to cover the meat. Well, Bernice, let's talk a little bit about diabetes. What puts people at risk for developing diabetes?
Well, there's a lot of different risk factors, and some of the main ones are people that are inactive, they're not exercising enough, overweight, certain races are more at risk. Us Native Americans, we're one of the races at risk for diabetes.
Bernice, how can someone prevent from being diagnosed with diabetes?
Okay, a healthy diet is real important. That's can be a part of the management of prevention. Or a person who can be active. The more active you are, that's going to help. But mainly it's diet and exercise.
What are some programs that the Choctaw Nation is doing to help educate people about diabetes?
Well, we have a diabetes wellness center in Tallahena. Also, we have our Labor Day festival at Tuskahoma, and people can come there for screenings, getting their blood pressures checked, their blood sugars checked during that festival.
Okay, while the deer meat is cooking, this is when you can prep your vegetables. They recommend that you cut your vegetables into small bite-sized pieces. We've already prepped our vegetables to save time. We're going to be using 6 carrots, 3 celeries, 2 large potatoes, 3 cups of tomatoes, 2 cups of fresh corn kernels, and our last vegetable that we're going to add 2 cups of okra. After we add our vegetables to our meat mixture, we're going to just let it simmer until done. But if needed, if you see that you need to add more liquid to your stew mixture, you can add vegetable stock. And today we're going to add some homemade canned tomato juice. And we're going to add 2 cups. So we're just going to bring these vegetables to a simmer, and we're going to simmer them until they're cooked. Bernice, what do you think of our Choctaw Hunters Stew?
It really looks good. There's a lot of vegetables in there, which is really healthy for us.
This Choctaw Hunters Stew can be served with good old cornbread or some fry bread. And today we're going to eat our stew with some fry bread.
Ipachi.
We've been out scouting plants all day today, and now we are here in the center of Choctaw Nation, and joining me is Dr. Ian Thompson with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma.
It's a pleasure.
And now that it's a little cooler, we're going to make some clay pots.
All right.
Can you tell me what we need to do?
Sure. This is the clay that I have, and this was dug on the Red River in McCurtain County, Oklahoma, down in the southeast part of Choctaw Nation. This is exactly how it comes out of the ground. For Choctaws, clay ties us back with our origin stories. And as I talk, go ahead and break it up into little pieces, and you'll find little roots, and you pull them out.
Is that a good thing, or?
There's one right here. I don't know if you can see that. It's pretty small. But when you find them, just toss them out.
Okay, so we want clean clay.
That's right. So the Choctaw word for clay is lokfinia, and that means the fat of the earth. And in our oral stories that tie us back to our creation and tie us back with the plants, the animals, the soil, and the water, they talk about God, Hashtali, creating our bodies out of clay in an area on the Naniwaya Creek. It's in present-day Winston County, Mississippi. And these stories say that God created our bodies out of this clay, and then there's a cave that you can still see there to this day that we crawled out of. And there's a big earth mound, more of a natural hill, that this cave comes out of, and the stories say that our ancestors crawled up onto that hill and sunned. And after our bodies hardened, God told us that that area would be our homeland, and if we would stay there, we would prosper. Our stories are handed down orally, just like our creation story, for many different things. One of the things is how we learned to create pottery. According to this story, there was a Choctaw man, and he had a basket made out of river cane. A pack basket is called kishi in the Choctaw language. And this basket had, an open structure so it wouldn't hold liquid. But it seemed to him like it'd be a good idea to take this lokfinia, this fat dirt, and pack it on the inside of his basket, let it dry, and then he thought it might hold water. So he carried out his plan. He took this clay and he packed it inside his basket, and then he set his basket near a fire to dry. And he got up to do something else. So while he was away, another man came along, and he saw that basket with all that clay in it. He said, well, that basket's dirty. I'm just going to throw it in the fire and burn it up. That's what he did. And of course, when the cane burned, it heated up the clay and it changed it chemically. It made it like stone. And the man found that he did discover a way to make a waterproof container, but not quite what he expected. So again, looking at archaeology, it tells us that that story, when Choctaws first learned to make pottery, goes back about 3,500 years. But what that tells us is more than 100 generations of Choctaw hands have shaped and developed this art form. Each generation's contributed something new to it, so it's developed through time. And today we just find ourselves in the current state of that art form, but it's got a past, a present, and a future.
So how much of this clay do we need before we start?
I think we're about there.
Okay.
If you've ever noticed the mud puddle in the summertime, as it starts to dry out in the sun, what happens to the surface of it?
Oh yeah, the whole ground will start cracking up.
That's right. And so the same thing can happen with clay. Choctaw ancestors were intelligent people, and they learned that there are different things you can mix with the clay to keep it from cracking.
Okay.
And this changed through time, first with Spanish moss, and then people started to use sand. Back about 1,000 years ago, Choctaw potters and others in the southeast started to use burned mussel shells. These are some that we burned a couple minutes ago. You can see how they break into these flat flakes. It's a plate-like form of calcium carbonate. The shell itself is very hard, but after you burn it and it goes through this chemical change, you can just crush it in your hands like
Oh, wow. Any shell will work?
Any freshwater mussel shell will work, at least from the United States.
And what are we going to do with this?
We're going to knead these into the clay, just like you would flour and bread dough. We'll use for this clay, we'll use about 1 part shell to 2 parts clay. And you just pretend that this is flour and your clay is bread dough, and you knead it together.
Okay.
The rougher you are on it, the better it is, the stronger it'll make the pot.
It's just like making pie crust.
I find that ladies that do make pie crusts often are really good potters naturally. Similar skills.
I make good pie crust.
You should be a good potter then.
So after we have our clay nice and molded and we've added the mussel shell into it.
Choctaw potters of the past use several different techniques. Today we're going to do the simplest one. It's a mold technique. You just use a hemispheric bowl. This one's made out of wood, but you can use one made out of clay. And then you line it with a cloth, like this. Take your clay and roll it into a ball.
Okay.
Then you stick your thumb in the middle of it, push it almost all the way through, but not quite, like this.
Oh, mine cracked.
That's okay. If it cracks, just push it back together.
Okay.
So you want it shaped kind of like that. Then you just set it in your mold. Now you use your thumbs to drag the clay and make it take the shape of the bowl.
Should it go over the edge or just?
You want it to go vertically at the edge. You don't want it to lean over.
Okay.
It's a little tricky, but you want the whole thing to be about 1/4 inch thick when you're done.
How high should it come off our mold?
Just however high it needs to use up your clay. Okay, so this is the next tool.
Okay.
It's a stone knife blade.
Wow. What kind of stone is this made out of?
This is Keokuk chert from northeastern Oklahoma. You take it and use it to scrape the edges of the bowl. Use it to thin if you need to. Basically, this just pushes the clay together and helps to smooth things out.
So you've taken yours out of your mold. Am I ready to take mine out?
Yes.
Should I be shaving some off my pot or?
Just on the high places. Overall, it's a good thickness.
So I'm checking with my finger and my thumb to see the thickness of it?
That's right. Your hands will tell you more about the thickness than your eyes will.
The next step will be to make it smooth, and I think a little daylight might help that process.
I agree.
All right, let's pick up tomorrow.
That sounds good. Okay, the last tool that we were using blended the clay together, but it left these lines, these indentations in the surface of the vessels. So now we're going to use these rocks to smooth it out. In modern terms, people call this a pottery rib.
So that's just a smooth pebble.
That's right. And you just support the bowl carefully with your hand so it doesn't collapse. And then you drag it across here and remove all of those places that aren't smooth.
Okay. And this also helps press out some air too?
It does, and it also helps to compact the clay together. If there are any little cracks in there that we can't see visually yet, this will help seal them together.
And that mussel shell, it's so fine that it doesn't really drag too much in the clay.
That's right. That will help us to get these nice and smooth so that we could put polished surfaces on them if we wanted to. It seems counterintuitive, but the thinner it is, the more likely it is to survive the fire intact. And now you just carefully trim the top. You get your hands wet and then you hold your fingers like this. You holding your fingers like that, you run them back and forth along the rim, and you flatten the top like that. The next step is to put a design in it if you want to. Now there are different options. Of course, if we had all day, we could sit here and let it dry a couple of hours. And then you can take a smooth rock like this, and when it's drier, you can rub that stone back and forth on the clay like this, and it burnishes it like that. And it'll get really shiny. Like if you've ever seen when you stick a shovel into the dirt, if there's a lot of clay and it gets shiny,
right?
This will do the same thing to your pot. And you can come back during the drying process and do it several times, and you can make it shiny enough to see yourself in.
Oh, wow.
There were styles through time. You know, just like today there's styles of clothing or cars. It was the same with the pottery for people all around the world. So I think it'd be appropriate to make whatever design seems best to you.
Okay. Okay, Ian, I think I have finished my pot.
You did a great job. You must have done this before.
I did it in today's style with OSU and a little Oklahoma gardening logo on there.
It's one of a kind.
What's the next thing we need to do with these?
Well, now we would let these dry for a couple of weeks very slowly, and then we'd be ready to fire them.
Excellent. So we have a fire going here, but this isn't any ordinary fire. This is actually a ground drying fire. Can you kind of tell us about the process that you took to get it to this point?
Sure. So this is where we're going to fire the pots, and one very important thing with firing is that you want to make sure there's very little moisture in the environment where the pottery is. They'll have a tendency to soak it up as they get warm in the fire, and it can make them blow up when it turns to steam.
Okay.
So you want to avoid that. The way that we avoid it is I've had this fire burning here for a few hours, and it's made out of hardwood. It's made out of bodark and oak, which produce a lot of coals. And as the fire produces coals, I take the shovel and I turn it into the soil. You turn the soil almost like you would a garden, in this case down about 6 inches or so, and that puts the coals right there in the sand, and it heats it up and it dries it out. So now this is really good and dry. Mm-hmm. Almost like cocoa powder, sandy cocoa powder. The next step to begin to get the fire ready to introduce the pottery is to spread the coals out into a circle.
Okay.
And then I take these pieces of broken fired pottery and I lay them on the hot ground. And we'll use the fire to dry these out and warm them up. It'll just take a few minutes. But what they do is they insulate the pots that we're going to fire from the soil. The soil acts like a heat sink. It pulls the heat out of the pottery. By setting it on this, it prevents that. And also it helps isolate it in case there may be a little bit of moisture we missed in the ground. It'll help protect it from that.
And this is a pretty hot fire. I mean, from what I'm feeling right here, all those coals are in the ground. I mean, this is hot right here.
Yeah, all that heat's escaping.
Yeah.
So now you just take them and put them in there and make a layer. You're welcome to help me if you want, or
okay.
If not, I understand.
Look at it bubbling.
Okay, now we'll just let those warm up for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll put the pots in here pretty quick. Now we just let them slowly heat up. Right now they're at about 200, maybe 250 degrees, right about the temperature water boils. That's one of the danger zones in the firing, so we'll keep them at that temperature for about half an hour or so before we try to take the heat up anymore.
Ian, it's been a few hours now and we've got a great fire that we've been watching. Tell us a little bit again what the process was. You moved the fire in on those.
So we heated up the ground to start with, like I was explaining earlier, and then we scooted out the coals from that fire into a donut shape around the hot ground. You helped me lay down broken pieces of fired pottery that made an insulative layer for us to set the pots we wanted to fire on top of. And then slowly over the course of about 2 hours, we scooted the fire in, we built it up right over the top of the pots that we were firing until they glowed red. And then we slowly backed the wood off and cooled them down, and they're still at the end of the cooling process right now.
So you want to slowly cool them down so that they don't shatter with that temperature change again.
That's right. You want them to cool slowly and evenly so that they don't have differential stress that could cause the pot to crack as it's cooling.
Excellent. We are here with Dr. Ian Thompson with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and we're going to do a little cooking, and we're going to start out with some lamb's quarter here. So how do we harvest this for cooking?
Well, the way my grandfather showed me is there are two different parts you can eat. One is you can eat the tips of the limbs like this with the leaves on it, and then you can also pick the leaves.
Okay.
Like this.
Okay, and you would probably want to do this either early in the morning or late at night before it starts to wilt too much. So now that we've collected a bag of this, we're going to take this back and cook it up.
Getting hungry.
Yes, great. We've had such an amazing time on our regional tours to southeastern Oklahoma. We've enjoyed the beautiful mountain views and the lush green forests. We've looked at how the horticulture industry affects our state's economy, as well as how horticulture has influenced the Native American history. We've looked at gardens that feed us, as well as pollinators. We've spoke with experienced gardeners as well as some younger gardeners that are just getting into it. We hope you've enjoyed this regional trip, and we want to thank everyone for their hospitality and for opening up their homes, their gardens, and their businesses to us. Over the next 2 weeks, we will not be aired during our regular time to make way for August Fest. We hope you take this opportunity to contribute to PBS. You can still catch us on OETA Okla throughout the week as we continue to air some of our favorite episodes. In 3 weeks, join us as we get back to gardening here at the Botanic Gardens in Stillwater.
There are lots of great horticultural events this time of year. Be sure and consider these activities when you're making your plans for the weeks ahead. To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussions on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows, as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater jewel. We wish to thank our generous underwriters, TLC Garden Centers, Southwood Landscape and Garden Center, and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, and the Oklahoma Horticultural Society.